The Detroit Pistons continue to add more elite shooting around Cade Cunningham. We'll talk about those signings as well as how the Pistons can take a jump up the standings in three-point percentage in just a moment.
Passing lane, sky's a jam. Dynamite dunk and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_313. You can also follow us over on Instagram at Pistons_Intellect. And as always, if you're feeling so kind, please hit that subscribe button. Now, on today's show, we're going to be recapping a couple of signings that happened over the weekend, as well as touching on an assistant coach who has joined JB Bickerstaff's staff. But first of all, I just wanted to note I'm doing this week's video a day earlier. Normally this video will be dropping on a Tuesday, but I can't record Tuesday night. So this will be the first half of the week's video. And unless, as always, if there's any breaking news, I'll jump back on to make another video. But just wanted to quickly flag that. But where I want to start today's episode is around the Pistons' second free agency acquisition, which occurred for me very late Saturday night, which I assume was quite early Saturday morning for our friends or people watching the show over in the US. And the Pistons have signed sharpshooting wing Malik Beasley to a reported one-year deal with the Pistons for $6 million. Per Shams of The Athletic. Now, this signing to some might not seem like a big deal, but as soon as I saw this, I was extremely excited because Beasley last season was just absolutely on fire from outside. So he averaged with the Bucks last season 11.3 points on 41% shooting from three on around 7 attempts. But when you have a closer look at the numbers, it really shows you kind of the type of shooter he is. And when he, per synergy, he was, as I just said, 41% on threes overall, 43% on catch and shoot threes, 40% on guarded catch and shoot threes. So that's with like a guy within a few feet of him or with their hand up in his face. And then on open threes, he shot 47%. So, you know, this is a guy that, like we've spoken about with Tim Hardaway Jr., like we've spoken about with Tobias Harris, he's another guy that when he's on the floor with Cade Cunningham, defenses are not going to want to leave him open. When you put him in the corner, defenders are not going to sag into the paint. He's a guy that defenses not necessarily have to scheme for, but you cannot leave him open. And I'm not sure if I just mentioned it, but he averaged pretty much 11 points, and he started for the Bucks last season. And overall, he ranked in the 95th percentile for jump shooters in the NBA last season. So he is truly an elite shooter. And look, the reason the Pistons are getting him for such a cheap deal and only on 1 year is because his defense leaves a lot to be desired. He's around 6'6", I believe. So he has the size of a wing, but his defense has been an issue. And that was quite an issue on the Bucks this season. But in terms of shooting and what the Pistons need, I think prioritizing offense seems to be the way Langdon's gearing this team, at least in the short term, with the signings like Beasley and bringing in another guy on the 1 year or expiring deal. And Tim Hardaway Jr., like I would say Tim Hardaway Jr. is more like a better off-ball mover and shooter. He did have a down year last year, Hardaway Jr., but in terms of flying off screens and kind of creating looks for himself off the ball, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. brings a bit more than Beasley. But, you know, Beasley last season was a much better shooter than Tim Hardaway Jr. So the Pistons kind of now have a pair of veteran wings that both are considered around the NBA to be elite shooters, or guys you have to man up on and have a defender on. So to get another guy like that, I was really excited because one thing Langdon kind of spoke about when asked about Cade Cunningham in his initial press conference was surrounding Cade with shooting and making his life easier. And this is just another addition. And the reason this title, the Pistons are putting a top 5 shooting team around Cade Cunningham, is because last season the Pistons ranked 26th, so in the bottom 5 for 3-point percentage, and they were 27th in the league for 3-pointers attempt. So not only could they not hit threes, they didn't take many. And some of that was to do with Monty Williams' coaching, but a lot of that was to do with the roster as well and how inept it was with shooters. And it's why a guy who we're going to get to in a second here, Fontecchio, it's why Simone Fontecchio was able to come in and look like such just a missing cog for this team, because he was a wing that could shoot, but also give you a little bit on defense. And the only real shooters the Pistons had last season were Bojan Bogdanovic, who was still an elite shooter. But I think I'll just speak for myself, I kind of didn't realize how much he'd lost on the defensive end, like just how bad he was. Like, I never thought he was a good defender, but he was like horrific defensively. The other shooter they had was Joe Harris, who couldn't get on the floor. And he was like $20 million just sitting on the bench. He just, not only could he not defend, but when he was on the floor, he couldn't hit threes. He was unplayable. Then you had Isaiah Livers, who in theory was a shooter, but that just never eventuated. And I'm trying to think, Monte Morris, who was meant to be a shooter, but he barely played. So to have now Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris, and Tim Hardaway Jr., all as new additions to this team, all guys who, aren't the best defensively, but compared to the shooters Detroit had last season, they are much better defensively. They have a lot more size, and they are all coming off, like they're all absolute dead-eye 3-point shooters. Well, not Tobias as much, but Tobias has turned himself into a pretty good shooter, and he's definitely a guy teams won't leave open. So, that's why I think the Pistons, I honestly, with Fontecchio now as well, and with Cade shooting as well, they have 4 really good shooters, a couple, I would say Beasley and Hardaway Jr. are closer to elite shooters. And then Hardaway's quite streaky, but I'm going to put him as one of the premier shooters in the league. I think they're just surrounding Cade with so much shooting. And I know they still have guys like Asar, Holland, and Duran who can't shoot, but if they keep Isaiah Stewart, that's another 36% shooter in the backup 5 position. So I'm really bullish on the Pistons as a shooting team this season. And I still want to see what this roster looks like, because I think following the Fontecchio signing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, the Pistons still have $19 million in cap space, so they can still go out and either sign someone, or I think definitely now, following their past 2 signings, I think they're going to lean in the direction of using that $19 million to bring in a bad contract or something to get assets. So I'm going to wait to see a bit longer until I start putting out projected lineups and that kind of thing, just until that last domino falls. But in terms of shooting, I think the Pistons have ticked every box. I spoke about some guys they could add on my previous episode, and Malik Beasley wasn't on there, but I spoke a lot about Gary Trent Jr., and I think Beasley's not as good of a bucket getter as Gary Trent in terms of the arsenal of moves, but just in terms of 3-point shooting, he's probably a little bit better. And to get him for $6 million reportedly, that's pretty goddamn good. So I'm super excited about that signing, and I think it's a low risk, high reward signing, in the sense of, I think even if he doesn't shoot 43% from 3 like he did last season, even if he still shoots 37% on the same amount of attempts, which was 7 per game, I still think that's a great signing. So moving on to the other signing of the weekend, which came for me Sunday morning, but for my fellow friends in the US, I assume that came Saturday night. But this was a bit of a shock, and in a good way. The fact that Fontecchio re-signed for a reported 2 years, $16 million, I think was just an absolute shock to all of us, because from the 16 games we saw of Fontecchio with Detroit last season, I think we're all expecting not only more money overall, but more years. And I'm no cap guru, but I would assume maybe due to his age and that kind of thing. I think Fontecchio is 28. So I believe once you get to the age of 30, which would be in 2 years, Fontecchio, maybe you're eligible for some form of bigger contract, and maybe he's banking on himself with the Pistons these next season or two to really up his value even more so he can get a huge payday in 2 years as opposed to signing 4 years and maybe missing out. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I could be making that up, but I thought I heard something today when I was listening to a podcast about Donovan Mitchell, and he wanted to become a free agent again at the age of 30. So either way, regardless of that, it feels like the Pistons have got an absolute bargain. $8 million per season for the next 2 years. And just to remind you all of some of the stats for Fontecchio in 16 games with Detroit, he averaged, and keeping in mind, he's 6'8", he's a wing, and he's reasonably athletic and not a bad defender. He averaged 15.5 points, 4.5 rebounds on 48% shooting from the field and 43% shooting from three on 6 attempts per game. He also, in those games, scored a career high 27 points. He had 4 games with 20 points or more. And in 13 of 16 games, he scored in double figures. So I think $8 million for that is an absolute bargain. I'm still I honestly thought like he was going to sign for like 3 years, 45. And he's pretty much got the total of what I thought would be one season worth for him. So maybe I was a little bit off, but I still think a lot of us thought he was at least going to get in that like $12 to $15 million per year range. So to get him for $8 million, I'm still like just saying it out loud. It feels like a bit of a shock because I was so impressed with him last season. Like when he joined the team, the Pistons had that really nice stretch where his first game, they almost beat the Clippers in LA. And they beat the Bulls on the road. They beat Portland. Like they had some really nice wins in games with Fontecchio, especially when Cade, Ivy, and the main core was playing. Detroit Pistons, their best lineup of the season that played at least 100 minutes was Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Fontecchio, and Jalen Duren. So just having a wing like that really allowed that Pistons core four to mesh. And that, like playing Asar and Duren, in my eyes, is something long-term I'm still pretty skeptical of. But in those 150 odd minutes, I think it was, the Pistons had a plus net rating. And sure, the sample size needs to be much bigger, but, he made these young players mesh really well, unlike any other player we've had on the roster in the past 2 seasons. So not only is it great to get him back, but it shows that adding Tobias Harris, adding Malik Beasley can shoot, adding Tim Hardaway can shoot, just adding these wings that can shoot really unlocks the Pistons' young core. So, on top of the Malik Beasley signing and the other wings I just mentioned, getting Fontecchio back is a huge win because I think there's a high possibility he's a starter opening night with how the roster looks right now. So to get a starting wing on $8 million, I think is an absolute steal. So let me know your thoughts on those 2 signings for the Pistons. And just to reiterate, after signing another 40% shooting wing, the Pistons still have $19 million in cap space. So I'm going to wait until I think my Friday episode to do like a pretty somewhat in-depth recap of the Pistons offseason so far with some grades and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been really impressive. So Trajan Langdon, whilst we haven't seen that huge swing like trade yet, I think every move he's made, some people are still a bit skeptical about the Hardaway Jr. one, and I get that, but I think for the most part, he's done a really good job. And I think a lot of Pistons fans are very excited for next season to start. So that's it on the Fontecchio signing. But yeah, like I said, let me know your thoughts on those 2 additions over the weekend. The final thing I want to get to before we get out of here is just quickly a coach signing. Sidney Lowe is joining Bickerstaff staff in Detroit. He was previously with JB in Cleveland, and not funnily enough, but interestingly, he was also on Dwayne Casey's staff for a period there in Detroit. So I think I've seen Jarrett Jack working out with Cade. There was a video that kind of surfaced, which is over on our Instagram, of Cade knocking down a couple of threes. So Jarrett Jack was passing him the ball there. So I don't know if Jarrett Jack's still on the staff, but to my knowledge, we have JB Bickerstaff, we have Sydney Lowe now, Fred Vinson, and yeah, like I said, maybe Jarrett Jack. Not sure what's happening with the other coaches as of yet, but I believe last season Monty brought in his whole new staff, so I'm not sure what kind of contracts those guys were on, because I can't imagine when they signed those deals they would think Monty would have been gone after a season. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the Pistons bench or coaching bench kind of works its way out, because last season was such a disaster all across the board. You wouldn't blame Bickerstaff for coming in and bringing in his own guys, but at the same time, I feel like some of those assistants on the Pistons bench, like, you know, like maybe it's not the worst thing if some of them come back. Like, I feel like they might have Monty just wasn't fully committed, and maybe, you know, I'd probably feel a bit sorry for those guys if they all got fired or let go, but ultimately they were part of a coaching staff on one of the worst teams ever. So, and it's quite typical for new coaches to come in and pick their own staff. So yeah, that's kind of all we know about the coaching staff. I still don't think I've seen or heard anything about when JB's press conference will be, but I assume it would be this week. I remember seeing it was going to be after the 4th of July holiday period and that kind of thing. So I assume it will be this week. So whenever that is, I'll try and get a reaction show out if it's not on Friday. But yeah, just some coaching stuff there. And I think that's going to do it for today. I'm just super stoked with the additions so far. I just want to reiterate, like, I truly think with the additions the Pistons have, if this roster kind of stays as is, I'm still very concerned about the defense. I'm not going to lie. The Pistons still, Fontecchio is a decent defender, but the Pistons still haven't got really any lockdown defenders apart from Asar and Stu, who both could be coming off the bench opening night. So still some concerns there, but I think the fact they've really leaned into adding shooting is a huge positive, because you need to give Cade that space to show us who he is and how far he can drag a team that makes some sense around him. Like, because ultimately that's what I feel like, even though Cade is about to sign that max, I hope we actually get some official news on that soon. This team still kind of needs to figure out, is Cade actually a number one guy, or is he more like a 1B, 2A type guy, which obviously wouldn't be ideal, but I feel like the Pistons are getting shooters around him for him to show, okay, this is how far and how good he can be with a roster that makes sense around him. And I think that's still kind of the main question this franchise needs to figure out with Cade. So I think Trajan is ticking the right boxes so far, and would love to hear your thoughts on the signings I've spoken about today, as well as so far in this offseason. So unless there's any breaking news, as always, we'll be back for Friday. And yeah, like, subscribe, all that kind of thing. Appreciate all the love. But yeah, till then, go Pistons.